Good afternoon and welcome to the FDP Faculty Forum and Business Meeting. I am Michelle Masucci, Vice President for Research at Temple University, Co-Chair of the FDP and Chair of the Faculty Committee. I'm here with my colleague, Robert Nobles, Vice President for Research Administration at Emory University and Vice Chair of the Faculty Committee of the FDP. We are pleased that you have taken time to join us in a meeting that combines two well-established program items in our typical in-person FDP meetings: the Faculty Luncheon Forum, in which we host discussions of timely topics in research administration that are of interest to our faculty members, and a business meeting in which the faculty come together to share progress on the activities they engage in through their FDP participation. The aim of these forums in general is to provide an opportunity to learn about the issues that impact faculty, as well as to provide our FDP members, including administrator, ERA, and faculty representatives and participants, along with our federal partners, with insights about how faculty and other academic professionals and trainees are thinking about, managing, and innovating their approach to research in the context of the financial, regulatory, and industry trends in higher education that pertain to research. Today, our forum is COVID-19. We are pleased to welcome 4 faculty members from the FDP community to share experiences in maintaining research continuity during the ramp down, work from home, and ramp up processes connected to the COVID-19 mitigation strategies their institutions are implementing. We chose individuals who represent a cross-section of types of institutions and geographic settings, as the strategies and impacts vary widely across our membership. The second part of today's meeting will focus on faculty business connected to the FDP. First, we will have an update on the outcomes of the IRB Wizard demonstration project that has recently concluded. FDP faculty representative Jane McCutcheon from New York University will share an overview of the project and the analysis of data that has been gathered thus far. She will also comment on some next steps with respect to the project. There will be time for questions and answers after the presentation. Second, we will share some announcements that may be of interest to the faculty representatives and participants in the FDP meeting. And we will open the floor, if time permits, to questions and answers from our faculty representatives during the business portion of the meeting. All are welcome to stay and be a part of both parts of today's meeting, the faculty forum and the meeting. Let me turn the discussion over to Robert Nobles, my colleague, who will introduce today's panelists and initiate the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to all of you joining us today for this faculty forum. In coming up with this session, Michelle and I, we were thinking heavily about the impacts to our faculty, the experiencing during ramp down, midst of this pandemic and the ramp up process, and hearing directly from our faculty to engage with other faculty colleagues, our administrators, colleagues, and faculty representatives are quite vital to the vibrancy of our research institutions. And so without further ado, let me introduce those that will be sharing insights and wisdom with us, beginning with Doug Delehanty from Kent State University, who's a professor of psychology. We also have Nancy Klimas from Nova Southeastern University, who's a professor and director of the Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine and chair of the Department of Clinical Immunology in the College of Osteopathic Medicine. We have my colleague Laura McCabe from Michigan State University, who's also a professor of physiology. And we have Josh Rosenblum from Iowa State University and Department of Economics, who serves as our resident department head. And so I have a series of questions. We'll begin with 5, but this is intended to be a dynamic session. So we'll hear from our speakers and then engage you after a series of 5 questions to our panelists. So let me begin. For our panelists, would you please describe for us the kinds of adjustments you have made to your program of research based on the institutional and funding restraints caused by COVID-19? How have these adjustments impacted the quality, continuity, and trajectory of your work and those close around you. Let me begin with Doug.
Thanks, Robert. I think most people would answer the same way, and that the adjustments have impacted all of those things dramatically. Just for specifics, my research specifically is looking at trauma patients, child trauma patients and their families, and we recruit them face-to-face in a hospital setting soon after they were seriously injured. So we very quickly were shut down. And I should also say, it's not our med school. We don't have a med school account. We're very conservative in some of the things that we do. And so this was via collaboration. So we immediately shut down all recruitment. We also know with face-to-face human contact that we will be last to be allowed to start again. So from a recruitment standpoint, we've really gone down to nothing. With some other projects and their funding, I was fortunate that the funding could be delayed before starting. Other things, we've been able to transition all follow-up assessments to online, so that wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, it took a lot of time to get everything set, but retention is going fine. The recruitment is at a standstill. And then I guess from the third part of productivity and scholarship, from a more personal standpoint, I have 4 kids ranging in age from 6 to 21 who are here and ever present, and they also seem to always be hungry. And so it is challenging just to find time to be productive with regards to writing, even though we say, well, now would be a good time to do that. It does create challenges in that regard.
Absolutely. I've even put out information to our faculty saying the same. This would be a great time to write and do your scholarship from home. Nancy.
I think that's exactly what we all thought we would be able to do until we attempted to do it. And it's not just the distractions. There's a tremendous increase in work that needs to be done in order to adapt to the changes that we all are trying to put into play here. So in fact, when I thought this would be an incredibly productive time, I find myself putting out fires more than usual. And it's very distracting. So I think the biggest things for me initially, of course, was that everybody tried to react responsibly, but we got very different directives, not just advice, from our local IRBs, from our institutions, from our funding agencies, and our funding agencies gave out different directives. And so I work at the VA and at a university, and I do studies across 6 or 7 different institutions. Oh my goodness. I mean, you could not find a center ground in that. And still to this moment, even there's been some time to adjust, those directives have some theme songs, do no harm. That's a really important one. But to some extent, we just said, we're going to be responsible here. If following these directives could do harm, and initially they could, they said stop everything. They didn't say stop recruitment. They said stop everything. We had people on dangerous medications. Of course you weren't going to stop everything. You had to do safety. So then they said, well, you can do safety, but you can't do anything else. And I'm like, well, if I have a needle in someone's arm, I'm going to draw the other tubes that I needed, you know? So, oh, by the way, so we had to go by the IRB and get some approvals for things that didn't exactly meet the directives, but offered no more risk to our subjects. So to back up, I'm doing a clinical trials site and translational research. And so my area, and I'm covering an institute that's clinical care, basic science, translational, and trials. So there's quite a bit of space there. Every single thing was impacted. So I think some of the issues that this group should be considering is that we tried to do the best we could and continue to do so, shifting to virtual platforms as much as we can. Has it affected our outcome variables? Absolutely. There's things that you cannot do virtually. Are we able to do mid-study shifts in primary outcome variable? Even if it's in the same domain, those of you that are, say, the neurocognitive folks would say, yeah, those face-to-face neurocognitive assessments are better, but there might be a virtual way to do that. And so we've been struggling with coming up with a mid-study comparable validation space to get our primary and secondary outcome variables aligned in a virtual space. Or plan B, going to home visits if it's possible. Not the safest thing for everybody, but safer than, say, dragging people into our hospital-based clinical sites. So, so we're going through all of these things study by study and trying to align the best thing we can do. One of the things that's going to hit us all is in doing all of this, obviously we're all, and all of our funding agencies have said we're going to be very generous with no cost extensions, but be very clear, those are no cost extensions. You still have to do the science on the original budget, and now it's going to take you longer to do that, and you're paying your primary people all the way through. So you're not going to be able to do your science on the budget that you had intended. You're going into those extra year or two to try to accomplish the goals of your studies in most instances without any additional funding. And so now you have to decide, how am I going to do this, tighten the belt and so on. And then there's new costs that weren't in the original budget. For instance, we're doing home phlebotomy a lot. We found some agencies that will do that for us. So we send people out to the sites and do everything else virtual, and that's fantastic. Costs money. It wasn't in the budget. You know, what can you say? So we're going to COVID test everybody. That wasn't in the budget, but it's an important confound in any of our studies. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of PPE, and you couldn't get it, let alone, I mean, these, even in hospital-based studies where we had stockpiles, I mean, I found myself down on my knees begging the clinical service for enough PPE for my research service, which is also doing patient contact, to be able to be safe and be safe for our patients. So these are the types of issues. So really seriously, we're regrouping right now, doing long-term budgets, trying to plan out these things. And then finally, I am a clinical immunologist. My interventions can be immunosuppressive. Can you do that? Like Doug said, some things you're just not going to do for a while. And so I had a couple of studies just ready to launch that had, particularly the ones that involve immune response to viruses, where we're trying to quiet, say, B cell function, and yet in this virus in particular, you need a healthy antibody response to reduce your risk of serious infection. And so the B cell depletion studies in our world are sort of on hold for the moment until we feel like it's safe and we think the IRB would agree with us.
Yeah, truly, it's a social experiment for crisis management from every area of jurisdiction on your campus. So absolutely understand, Nancy. I'll turn it over to Laura to provide some insights related to physiology.
Sure, thank you. So I think, you know, like everyone, we had to pause everything, and I'm a biomedical researcher in a lab, so we work with mice and cells. So we froze the cells down, we stopped we were able to complete our animal studies, but it still seemed like a onerous task to shut down. But little did I know that the starting up is much more complex, because like it's been said, we need PPE for research PPE. We need to, as we're ramping up, we need the facilities available, and the cores that we use on campus need to be also open and active. And, you know, we have to, it's just going to be, it's a much bigger process than we anticipated. I think the other thing is that this change has helped me to see that we really have to prioritize time with the students. So the students are having lots of fears. So they're afraid of getting sick. They're afraid their parents are sick and they can't get to them. Their parents are out of the country, and again, they feel that they can't support them. Then they're getting behind on their projects, so they're very anxious about that. There's worries about the future career possibilities and how that's going to go. So they're bearing quite a bit of stress. So I've been finding that providing them some structure and direction has been helpful. Having Zoom meetings and working with them in sort of managing their time and helping them to be kind to themselves and set realistic expectations, because this is a difficult time, and it's, you know, we can, they have so much stress to try to get it all done, and it's just not going to happen. And overall, our momentum has been lost right now. I think we can get it back, but it's going to be a slow process, and it's integrated. We're going to have to expand the colonies again, you know, develop a lab that's safe and has disinfectant procedures. But on a good note, I think everyone's getting comfortable with the virtual meetings. The students grasp the cloud drive and the importance of having your data accessible to everybody more now than ever before. And I think we're probably set back, I don't know, 10 months or so in time because of this.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting that it's not a one-to-one trade-off. If you lose a month, then it only takes a month to regain it, that there's other implications. We saw that when we had the federal shutdown too over the last couple of years. Let me turn to Josh from a perspective of economics.
Sure, thank you. So at Iowa State, we didn't ever shut down entirely. We went to a maximum work from home emphasis, and the campus remained open for people who had essential projects that they were doing. As a department chair, I was asked to encourage all of my faculty to shift their efforts to things that they could do from home and to avoid being on campus. And I mean, for me in the social sciences, I didn't have to deal with, as fellow chairs did, with issues about folks in the lab sciences. We've heard about that from Laura and Doug and Nancy. So I won't dwell on that, but the chairs in departments where that was a predominant mode of research really had to walk a kind of fine line, because they couldn't tell people they couldn't come in. They did have to tell them what ground rules they had to have for physical distancing in labs or shifts or cleaning. And I did have some faculty who were working on projects with restricted data, which could only reside on a particular computer. So they had a contract that says you can only work on this computer that's not connected to the internet, or some other rules like that. And so in that case, we had to navigate. One of them had 2 PhD students who were finishing their dissertations using these same data, and they had to work out a way to not be in the space at the same time and to clean up adequately between one and the other. So there were a set of issues there. We have gone through a couple phases of planning for the possibility that we would shut down everything but essential research. So we've made people fill out applications to identify those projects that are essential research. And across the campus, we have, obviously, being a land grant with a big ag school, we have faculty who are doing work with livestock or other animals, and those obviously they've had to be in to deal with those with maintaining those animals and supporting them. We have a lot of people who do field research. They're out in the field, and one of the challenges that they've faced is a trade-off about safety. So some of the field research is fairly remote. They have to drive several hours, and you're facing this trade-off. Do you tell people you have to be in different, everybody has to drive in their own vehicle, and you increase the risk that somebody has an accident, especially if it's a long drive and it's a late day and people are driving back, versus increasing the risk that they're exposed to something because they're both in the same car. And so that's been an issue that people have dealt with. And then as we were talking about the possibility of shutting things down, people who do things on an annual cycle with crops have had to decide, are you going to go ahead and plant things? Are you going to go ahead, or are you going to give up the year, or are you going to take the risk that you'll be able to recover from those fixed costs? For me, I have a couple of research projects. I have one where we had a focus group that was scheduled for this spring, and we pushed that off to the fall. Wasn't a big adjustment. I've had to figure out how to work with my RA at a distance, and that's been an adjustment. But for me as a department chair, the situation has just been an enormous time sink. The amount of meetings that I've had to be in, and I'm sure Robert and Michelle would echo this, have increased geometrically. We are I'm meeting about 4 times as often as I was before with deans, and talking about everything, and we talk about it a lot, and we talk about it 3 or 4 times, and then I have to communicate that to my faculty. So that's been a big challenge, is the communication piece. So I guess those are the biggest adjustments that I've had to make.
That's fair, Josh. I'm on Zoom all day, every day. I thought I was going to be able to walk around the neighborhood holding my wife's hand, and I can't barely even eat lunch. So I completely understand. So let's talk about trade-offs briefly. So the next question I'll ask directly to Doug and Nancy, but what kinds of decisions did you have to make, and what trade-offs were involved as you had to make these adjustments related to this moving to a remote setting from home during the period of the pandemic? And then directly, did any priorities change in the context of your research or the approach that you're taking in carrying out your research activities? Doug, trade-offs.
Thanks, Robert. It's interesting because I don't think you had to make any decisions initially. We were just told to go home. We were told from the hospital, don't come here. And we were told from Kent, do not come here either. And undergrads are not allowed on our campus, period, until further notice. And so in some ways, the decisions and you were also told to keep paying everybody. And so as Nancy already alluded to, that took away a lot of decision processes also, and presents all the no-cost challenges that she mentioned. And so there's many more decisions with regards to processes for starting again. And in this, my role as an associate VP for research, I'm leading the efforts at Kent. And that is a really interesting dynamic of recognizing vastly different risk tolerance levels for both humans and entities, and working with our motivation is to try to help those who want to get back to research get back as quickly as they can, but there's many that think that they have no interest whatsoever until this has really been figured out. And so there's quite a few more decisions on how do you balance all of these differing wants and needs, and what if the advisor doesn't want to come back, but the grad students saying they have to, and how do all these different things intermesh with safety and everything else? I would say basically that none of this changed the priority that I or my colleagues at Kent place on research, but the approach is obviously just vastly different at this point. So we have transitioned masters and dissertations midstream to eliminate our psychophysiological assessments. We've done everything that we could do that Nancy talked about as well. What's a measure of this that we can use, that we can administer online, and things of that nature. And so the approach is quite different, but the priority that we place on research hasn't really changed.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Nancy, any trade-offs?
I mean, I always try to find the good. People always tell me I'm too much of the rose-colored glasses kind of person. But I think this ability to use a virtual platform in our clinical trial space is going to be a huge benefit. We've been trying to push that way for the last 3 years, and going through different levels of peer review, and always push back saying it's too experimental, we don't know, get some data, come back. We've been having a lot of trouble moving even nutraceutical types of studies into a virtual space. And now all of a sudden we're being said, move it, go, shove, get it done. So those very safe studies moved to a virtual platform, I think, are going to be good. We already had some experience using cognitive behavioral therapy virtually with our past work with Mike Antoni and Neil Snyderman's group at the University of Miami, and that worked very well, and we were able to collect very good data. So we already had some solid outcome variables data in a virtual platform to allow us to move in that direction. But I think one of the big things, and it's going to be tremendously cost effective from the funding agency perspective, is the move to move the safest types of interventions into a virtual space widen the ability to recruit from a national platform instead of a local platform. For me, the hardest thing, the most expensive thing in clinical research is recruitment. It's always the thing that slows down every single study and gets us off our timelines. But when you can go national, regional, virtual, your recruitment barriers really start flying down. So there's a positive. And I think it's going to be a really important one that could do very well-powered studies much more cost effectively than the way we've been doing them. So I'll take that. Now, for the really important work we were trying to do in these complex medical conditions that have no interventions, the patients are desperately seeking something effective. And we put on hold the big curative types of things we were trying to do because they need closer supervision and more safety checks. It's going to cost them 2 solid years in my mind's eye before we get back into the space where we could get that back into the development stage. So I feel really bad about that. For me, that's been, our institute takes things from the very first idea all the way through to the trials. And oh my gosh, what a terrible thing it is to have to hold up on those kinds of things. Your concept about the students, how to integrate the students into the research thing. Before we were doing a lot of face-to-face, hands-on mentoring, and now it's a lot more work, Laura, to get those students engaged in our process because they have to be in the Zoom meetings with us. We have to remember them. We have to engage them. We have to say, okay, they're a part of it. So to get out of this crisis mode and get back into business as usual, and oh, by the way, this is now going to be usual. How do we get that cloud of students that are in our circle that are learning things by observation and then by doing? I think that's going to be a part of it. There's a lot there.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we're learning is that there was this fast tracking of use of telemedicine and virtual forms of engaging with cohorts, but I still question it, and we'll move on to the next question, but I still question if we're still building the other skills of people who are trainees that virtually. I think there's a lot of tactile things that are necessary. There's a lot of reading of body language. And
I'm sorry.
you there, Nancy?
You're breaking up, so I
Can y'all hear me?
hear you.
I think Nancy is breaking up, but y'all can hear me though. Okay. All
You're
right. So
up pretty good.
it's fine.
That was me.
Yeah, it's you. You could just mute it, and I'll move to the next area. So having said that, I think it's surprising. So I'm going to ask Josh and Laura a question related to the most significant or most surprising aspect of adjustments that they've made to their research program or that they've seen during this pandemic.
Sorry.
Go ahead and mute, Nancy.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My connection's weak. I'm going to go off and back on.
That's fine. Okay. Nancy and Josh, Laura and Josh, what is the most surprising aspect of the adjustments that you've had to make either to your research program or that you've seen during this pandemic?
So
Go ahead, Laura, ladies first, absolutely.
Okay. I've just been so amazed at how people from across the university with different, areas have come together in meetings to try to solve problems, especially for the reentry, because you have to have the building infrastructure, pipes have to be flushed, you've got to have the EHS, environmental health and safety, on board, making sure things are safe. You've got the VPR's office, you've got everybody coming together, signage, we have to make signs and all these things, and they work together and they bring their expertise. University physicians key in providing guidance. And so I've just been so impressed, and the way that they're taking the time to hear each other and understand each other. And also the way that people are stepping up and taking on a load, something new, something they don't know, like building a survey in Qualtrics, which is like really tricky system. And so training and being able to do that. And so it's this innovation and determination to do things right. As J.R. Haywood says at the end of all of our meetings is always, he says, so many extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. And it's really true.
Absolutely. Josh?
Well, in one sense, there, there are things that maybe seem surprising, but in retrospect shouldn't have been. I think, you discover how many people it takes to make anything work. And so, in my department, with a staff of 10 or 12, and they all have a part to play in getting things done, whether it's the IT support people who have to make sure that people have the equipment that they need to work from home, or the professional and scientific staff who are doing research projects that need to get something done, and they need, and we need them to help us to get things done. So that part has been, if nothing else, a reminder of all of the ways in which things that are part of the team and are invisible when everything's going smoothly and there's no crisis. You discover when you stress the system where all of those people are and what roles they play and all the things that they're doing every day that make stuff work. And that you just don't see. So I think that part has been certainly been, in some sense surprising, or a revelation, or a reminder. I think we've been, the facility with which we have moved to virtual meetings, to doing all of this stuff by Zoom or WebEx or whatever tool we're using, has been impressive to me, and it's been a real kind of forcer of certain kinds of exploration that we've been resistant to. So I think, on the instructional side, on the teaching side, most of my faculty would have said, and probably still would say, teach online? Never. I hate that. But they've all been forced to do it this semester, and I think it's a great opportunity, and to explore what works and what doesn't work. It's a lousy experiment, because we haven't done any of the things you should do to teach online well, but we've managed to get through it, and we've learned some things, and I don't know what we're going to do in the fall, but I hope we will have learned some things about that piece, and that we might actually change some of what we do in response to that. We've also seen what the limitations are. I think the biggest thing that I miss is the day-to-day interaction. When I'm being department chair, I'm in my office most days, and my door is open, and people drop in. They have things that they want to get done, and it's been really hard to figure out how to replace that part of what I do. So
no, just imagine when you have to hire new faculty members or onboard individuals as part of your team as well.
Yeah, no, that part is going to be really challenging.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, so this is a lightning round for our 4 members, and I'm just going to ask you in a condensed sentence, what is the most difficult aspect of how COVID has impacted you, your campus, your community? What, from your perspective, in your vein, what is the most difficult aspect of dealing with COVID? Lightning round. I'll go with Laura first.
It's the uncertainty. That's the most difficult.
All right, Doug?
Well, she got to say uncertainty first. That's not fair.
Oh,
But
sorry.
I'll add to that. I think the financial impact. I mean, I think that what lots of folks are just struggling with is the immense budget cuts, the impact that's going to have on our institution. And our sister institution has gone through the process of having rules changed so that tenured faculty can now be fired if necessary. And so I think we're very cognizant of the impact that the financial aspects of this is having.
Josh?
Yeah, my biggest worry is about the pipeline. I'm worried about what's going to happen to PhD students who are completing their studies in the next couple of years, because I know we're not going to be hiring, and I suspect a lot of other places aren't going to be hiring. And I'm worried about recruiting new students, and I'm worried about restrictions on international students, and what all of that is going to do to the scientific workforce of the future, and how we're going to manage that, because this is going to just be a great big disruption to all of those things.
And I think Nancy is off. So then I'll take the prerogative of the moderator to ask Michelle. Michelle, what is the most difficult aspect that you've had to encounter during this pandemic?
For me, the most difficult challenge has been, like many people, managing what seems to be the largest workload I could have ever imagined to have in an environment with some of the most significant constraints I've ever faced to get the job done. Like many faculty members, I wear an administrative hat as well as being a faculty member, and having to deal with both making sure that you provide the information that's needed for your colleagues so that they can do their best effort at continuing their research while simultaneously maintaining my own research program. That's just a really, really deep challenge. In my case, I work with high school youth in the summer, and so we also are facing some challenges outside of the university that impact greatly what we're able to do. So in our school district, our students are home. They don't have good, reliable internet connections. And as a result of that, we have real constraints in what we're able to do with them from a program standpoint, even while we at the university, I think, enjoy some decent resources. Thank you.
No, absolutely. All right, so we're going to shift. I went through 4 questions for the panel, and I want to give an opportunity. We're 40 minutes into the session for the audience to raise their hand. We will unmute you. I do know that Jerry Cohen wants to ask a question related to safety. I want to give him an opportunity to be able to do that. If Jerry has a mic. And I believe he does. I'm putting you on the spot, my friend.
No problem. So the chat that I sent you, I basically asked, because I didn't really hear a lot about the thing that troubles me a lot, which is, we have some access to our research facilities, but I have postdocs and graduate students who use those, and we have a fairly complex Google Calendar system for metering out. But it's really be interested to hear other comments about how we protect the safety of these people. My postdoc's essential because we have tissue culture things that have to be maintained and a variety of things. This becomes a fairly complex problem because I'm not just metering the people in my lab, but it's a building that wasn't designed for COVID-19 organization. It was built in 1965, and it's open floor plan and a lot of things that made it really difficult to do space coordination. So I constantly am worried, and that's the way my lab meetings usually start and end is, how are we doing? How are you safe? What are we going to do? And then the one thing that the university is busy at doing this around the state, but not so busy doing it on campus, which is testing, because I think until we have the ability to actually know the health status of the people around us, we really can't address those safety issues of the people that we're in charge of taking care of. And that next generation of science is really a concern to mine. They say we only have 2 products, the next generation of scientists and the data we obtain. And I heard a lot about data protection, but next generation protection, I think, is at this point probably more important than anything else that we do. That's it.
That's
I
helpful.
can go back to Josh.
So for my panelists, who would like to respond? I think Nancy, I don't think you're adjusting your mic. You're actually raising your hand to respond. How are we?
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes. How are we
Great.
protecting our trainees? What are the
That
best mechanisms to protect our trainees?
It's a very big issue. And of course, it also matters in these clinical studies quite a bit because we're engaging medical students in our training. And it is a part of their training to know that there is risk in their jobs. The other issue is in our laboratories, we have samples coming in that are COVID samples. And so we had to try to create a plan in a big open laboratory that had some but not everything we needed to be appropriate for that to make some big decisions, like only using inactivated viral samples rather than active viral samples and that type of thing. So there's a lot of decisions you're making to try to maximize the safety and then understand the level of risk from the perspective of the student or the trainee. And if it's appropriate to, is there anything you could have done to mitigate that? Is there any way to absolutely maximize the safety? And we have to do that. Our school, for instance, has delayed everything another month and a half, not because it's not time to start seeing patients again. We need to see them, but we don't have PPE. We don't have enough. So now it's a whole extra month before we start opening elements of our campus up to routine things. I mean, the clinical care is something rather important because of PPE.
Yeah, that's fair. Doug, Josh, or Laura, anything you want to add? I could tell you what we're doing at Emory and what I'm guiding campus, but
Well, I think
go ahead, Doug.
not rehashing different restart kind of plans or something, but just on a personal level from a lab, I do take everything that Nancy said very seriously. And I think one of the concerns that I have is I am probably allowed to have, as soon as the hospital says that's okay, and that is probably today, undergrads go and recruit for me. Now I have 5 to 8 that say they want to. There's just no way to get away from the fact that, well, okay, they're safer if they don't. And, but they really want to probably to get a great letter from me about how great they'd be at grad school. And there is just simply a compulsion or even coercive deferential power relationship there. And I struggle with that a little bit. I mean, you can ask as many times as you want. I mean, how safe do you feel? Do you want to do this? You're not a high-risk individual. We can give you the masks and these things, and you'll follow the procedures they have at the hospital. But it still is a struggle, I think.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, and the basic requirements for which that we're implementing, just because we've implemented laboratory practices within BSL 3 labs and BSL 2 labs, is that everybody will wear a face covering. Where we have put a diameter around individuals, a 6 feet radius plus movement capabilities. So then we have a 250 square foot density to reduce density in the location, a requirement to disinfect before and after use of at your workbench and other areas. And if you're dealing with samples, of course, be in a biosafety cabinet. And if you are breaking the radius of the 6 feet with 2 individuals, then we've asked individuals to increase the level of PPE to use a surgical mask. We are not mandating testing for everybody coming into the laboratory setting, but we did reduce density in space locations and making people put together plans on if they're going to be breaking the social distancing guidelines of how they're going to keep individuals intact. And so there's a series of things that we can do and that we are doing, but I think safety is important, and it needs to start with the top, with the PI of providing adequate guidelines and equipment necessary so that people can be safe. If not, we shouldn't do the activity. George, I wanted to recognize you to ask your question next.
Actually, my question was just about what was the raise hand option, because I didn't see it. But since you have me here, we at the University of Cincinnati are going through the same kinds of things that you all seem to be. I think the enormity of the challenge, and I'm sure it is for the more administrative side, but I sympathize as an ex-department chair, is how the complexity is one size does not fit all. And trying to coordinate some set of guidelines for how you ramp up research and how you regulate the protection of students. We have gotten, our response is quite often a bureaucratic overcompliance, but we're asked in advance to have all kinds of student schedules, who's going to be in what rooms, so that should something happen, contact tracing is easier. That's perhaps a clever way to deal with it. In my personal case, I feel lucky in that my lab is at a low right now, small number of personnel, but at the same time, I'm dealing with the biological imperative of a field season and bringing animals from the field into the lab. And that creates a real challenge for administrators who themselves have no idea what I do. You're there.
Well, okay, so then that brings us to the next question. Well, Laura, did you want to add something to that topic before I go to the next? Okay, so that George brings up a good point, which is really the next question. And we'll ask for the faculty panel, but others could chime in as well. Related to the impacts that the pandemic has had on us collectively, there's certain nuggets of excellence that have been demonstrated for which that should be leveraged going forward after the pandemic is over. So in thinking of that, what advice or recommendations would you have for, one, administrators on your campus and working with faculty, and two, the federal authorities for which that grant faculty sponsorship for their research? What things are we leveraging from this pandemic to provide advice to our administrative colleagues and our federal sponsored colleagues? And so let's go, I like doing ladies first. So Laura was going to respond before, so I'll start with her and put her on the spot. Advice to administrators and advice to federal.
So I think that, what I've learned from this is that what's really worked for us have been things that were already put in place in advance. We developed a building manager for our building years back, and now that person is the one that's moving up and down the halls and checking things. She caught a pipe break 2 months ago, thank goodness, and that was able to be fixed. The department chair had the foresight to see ordering extra -80 freezer. So what happens, I get this notice, I'm watching the temperature of my -80 freezer go to -40, and here we are in the middle of a crisis, and now what do I do? Luckily, we had the backup for that to occur. So sort of anticipating these future things. And our grant submission process, pre-awards, we've been doing that online, back and forth with the office, and that just flows smoothly. So we were able to submit 2 grants like usual. So I think that the foresight is really important, something that we have. So there's this thing I read, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, had said, during a crisis isn't the time to get creative. Whatever you've done, you should be a solid, company or whatever now. And so I think that's one of the things to take home. Planning for future, so we're this way for the next crisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nancy?
So one of the things that I liked that had to be done was this enough flexibility in what is usually very inflexible systems to allow leadership to play a role and make good decisions for the patients and the study subjects and all the people engaged. And I thought that was that flexibility. First, we rose to the occasion. I don't think anyone took advantage, but rather things that you might have waited months and even many committee levels of peer review to be allowed to put into place, we were able to put into place immediately and then go back and inform the oversight committees. That I thought was something we could learn something from. I like your concept about having what's already in place. We live in Florida, so we go through hurricanes with more regularity than we like to. And we've learned the very, very hard way that there's things, much like you were describing, the back of freezers and the alternate power supplies that can really play a role here. But sometimes things get too rigid, and we've been literally locked out of our building and not able to check on things that have to be checked on. So again, it's about that flexibility, having some faith that no one's deliberately putting people in harm's way, and that the leadership of various operations have to be allowed to work under this kind of situation effectively.
No, absolutely. Josh and then Doug.
So within the university in the administrative setting, I think the biggest thing that I'm worried about is that there's going to be a really big increase in emphasis on undergraduate instruction. I mean, it's a really important part of what we do, but there's no getting around the fact that most of us are tuition-driven institutions, and we have all the adjustments that have been made and are almost certainly going to have to be made in the fall. There's going to be a lot of faculty time that gets absorbed there, and changing expectations about what it means to be fully engaged in research, at least in the short run, is going to be really important. Iowa State, extended everybody's tenure, gave everybody the option of extending their tenure clock by a year. That's probably one step, but it may not be enough, and it may not be long enough. On the federal side, I think I would say that we've talked about the fact that people continue to keep their research assistants and postdocs on the payroll, and that they're not necessarily working on the projects. And I think that it's going to be really important to look not just at the immediate goals. I mean, we have project-funded research. I mean, that's how we do it. I've been on the other side of that, but the bigger picture is about supporting the research infrastructure of the nation, and taking a more expansive view about that big picture, and understanding that there is going to be a need for additional resources to keep projects going, and to get them to completion is probably going to be a really important thing going forward.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Doug?
Yeah, real quick, our central admin, I think I really agree with what Nancy said earlier. From the very beginning said we're approaching this from the position of extreme maximum flexibility, and that's it. And I think we did learn a lot of things, both administratively as faculty, that things that required weekly committee meetings for a semester could be done in a day, and you could get lots of things done, and we could really learn a lot from working under schedules without throwing up so many barriers to certain things. And I guess the other thing that would be probably a take home for admin and faculty in general is, again, was said earlier in response to a different question, but that there's really no one size fits all. At Kent, I was struck, the most vocal individuals who want to get back into their spaces, and they want to do it 2 months ago, and they have no concept why they're not allowed, is our arts faculty. They have studios that if you could just simply transport them into the studio and not have them go anywhere else, they go in, they lock themselves for 8 hours. When I suggested, well, you could think about your next project, I was told that shows my complete and utter naivete with regards to understanding what they do and everything else. And I think, there's a lot of that's true. But everybody is very different in their own risk tolerance, and everybody's different in what they could do in their spaces. And so approaching it and using some of the things that Robert mentioned, the spacing and use of masks and things of that nature, we're trying to very soon initiate our first phase of returning to campus.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we'll take a question or two from the audience if you have them, but let me ask the group while we're waiting for those questions to come in. When we think about the fall and the uncertainty for the fall semester, how right now we're ending May, how are you planning? How are you conceptualizing what's going to occur in the fall, and how are you planning your research activities and your engaged faculty roles as a result of projecting, being Freudian in a way, of what the plans are for the fall, knowing that this summer and the group gatherings that are occurring as a result of Memorial Day and the increase in testing that is availing to states, all of this is going to be swirling, and so there'll be new discoveries and understanding related to the virus and how it's moving through our community. But how are you as faculty thinking about the fall right now? And what can our representatives from the federal government or even on your campus leadership be thinking about from your perspective related to that? So I won't put Laura and Nancy on the spot first, like I always have this session. Let me start with our department head and then move to Doug, our AVP, and then we'll go to Laura and then Nancy. Josh, from your perspective, how can you project the future? What do you want people to know?
I can't project the future. I'm planning for everything. We're planning for Plan A1, which is students are back on campus, and we're going to figure out some way to offer classes with adequate social distancing and some kind of protocol for cleaning surfaces when they enter and when they leave, and staggering class times and finding ways to meet the demand with the same space and fewer and lower density. And on the other hand, planning for it may all be online, and so I my faculty went off the 9-month faculty went off the payroll about 2 weeks ago, and I told them, you're going to come back in the middle of August, and we might tell you you have to do something completely different from what you thought you were going to be doing. So, and frankly, I have a great deal of trepidation because we are going to bring 30,000+ students back to a small town in the middle of Iowa from wherever they've been, and we're going to mix them all up, and they're going to be in dormitories, and they're not going to be in dormitories. They're going to be out of our control except in the classroom, and I'm not sure how much value there is in social distancing in the classroom when we're pretty sure they're not going to be social distancing outside the classroom. So I'm worried about that. I'm worried about how do we, I've already been told I have to have a backup instructor for every class that we're teaching, somebody who can step in, and I'm worried about older faculty who may feel they're vulnerable, and I'm worried about immunosuppressed faculty and students, and I'm worried about anybody else who thinks they're vulnerable. So I'm really concerned. I'm concerned about having to tell people that they have to come back, I'm so I'm worried about a whole lot of things that I don't have any control over as a department chair.
Absolutely, including the timing.
Yeah.
Doug, being Freudian.
Josh gave a very good and comprehensive answer. I think that the take home would be, I have no idea. On a daily basis, something could change. So, I mean, as you said, 4 pictures of a bar with people hugging and kissing and drinking next to each other might take our governor to say, everybody go back home tomorrow. And we're starting to, so we really don't know what to plan for. And I think that creates, all this uncertainty is paralyzing to some extent, or you have plan 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and you keep going out. And I think that's where we kind of are. It's from a research standpoint, it's relatively easy. I can relatively, and all the qualifiers, safely figure out a way to allow people back in a very tiered, staggered time frame and other things that limits their risk to much less than going to a grocery store. I have no idea what happens when you start bringing in the kids back, because college kids socially distance as well as kindergartners do. And in all honesty, when I was in college, the main goal was to not socially distance if that was possible. And so I have no idea how you figure out that math. And we're just waiting on we could be back in some small classes that have to be more in person. We could just as easily be all online, and no one knows the answer. My class is easily adaptable online and does not require face-to-face. So I'm pretty well set in that regard, but lots of others are dealing with those decisions.
So and I'll turn it over to Laura, but don't you think if we have an online setting for education, that's going to impact the trainees that are available to carry out research activities? And so, it might be rhetorical, Doug. You don't have to answer. I'm turning it over to Laura. You're still muted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it will. You know, I'm not enthusiastic about taking in like 10 undergrads in the fall into the lab. Normally, we have numerous students come in, but we're going to be very particular. I mean, for multiple reasons. You know, they need to be fully trained and mature and be able to follow the rules. And there's the social distancing. We just want them to have space. We want it to be safe. And so those training experiences are going to be for only a few. I just don't see it being as usual. And so I also think that the teaching worries me, like the others have said. You know, our faculty are getting their retirement cut and salary cuts, and then they're being asked to, if there's social distancing, classes there'll be sections. So the same faculty is going to teach multiple sections of their class. So we're really spreading the faculty quite thin. And they're, in many cases, they're in a vulnerable level. And so if they get sick, I think that's going to be a real problem, because we're expanding the class load. So I think that those things all need to be thought out. On the other hand, if it's something like flu, maybe in the early part of the semester, things will be fine. And it won't be until November or something when things start getting out of control. And then maybe then we could switch to online or something. But, you know, and all of it is this huge load on the faculty, because they have to be so agile to be able to deal with this. So I'm impressed with, you know, no complaints. They keep working hard.
No, indeed. All right, Nancy, I'll give you the final word, and then I am going to turn it over to the next segment of our session. Nancy, Freudian.
First, I wouldn't hold your breath for November, because it's when they first come back and have a couple of rounds of infection. Give it 6 weeks, and I think you'll see your peak student infection transmissions. So be very, very careful on that. But I think the thing that I would take back on this is, again, that word flexibility. If you have people who are 65 and older, or they're on immunosuppressive drugs or whatnot, you really have to be able to give them an at-home schedule for a while. If you could possibly be flexible enough to let your older faculty or your faculty with health impairments work from home as much as possible, and because they're the most vulnerable. The death rate is huge over 80, and some of us do have over 80-year-old faculty members actively working. 70 to 80 is 5 to 7%. It's not a small number, okay? 65 to 70 drops down a couple few percent, but it's still unacceptably high. So that, again, the older you get, the more you have to be willing to let those faculty be as virtual as possible and keep those precautions really, really high. Student body the same way. If you got people with rheumatoid arthritis or other things that put them on immunosuppressive drugs. If they've asked for accommodations, it's a good place to go looking for them. Send them special letters saying you're going to do absolutely anything you can to keep them safe, which includes staying at home and working virtually. And the dorm would be a terrible place to be if you were on an immunosuppressive drug right now.
Yeah, very true. And before we turn it over, I'll just let you know that there was a question related to if there were any pearls of wisdom that we've learned to improve recruitment or retention of underrepresented minority students, or anything of relevance to Black and Brown students in general. So that's a general question, but do you think that there are certain segments of our student population that would be negatively impacted by advent of this pandemic, and if there's any solutions for that?
Such a tough one. You know, from the study subject perspective, we've been able to increase our enrollment to underrepresented people because we can target them during the so-called downtime when the recruitment staff are just recruiting and we've gone virtual. We've been able to use social media to target into Black and Brown, in our case, veteran populations from toxic exposures, and really improve our recruitment. From the student perspective, one of the issues has been across the board with all students, but definitely students that may be financially at risk, not so much by color, but by finance. Do they have really access? As I just had my whole router go down because I've got 2 people doing school in the background of me, and I got over my bandwidth there. So what do? Have you know, a lot of people trying to be virtual, and is there enough access to the tools that they need to be successful?
Which I think is the difficult part. So let me transition us over.